God, Viego really does all for nothing, huh? Ugh. Hello and welcome to Vision Denial. My name is Sam, and if you're new here, I watch every single playoff game of every region that participates in any international tournament. Asterisk. And we're doing Road to MSI 2023. Why the asterisk? Well, that's because the LEC, the European region, yes, I don't care that they rebranded. There's not a single non-European team in that league. Is just ridiculous. But we'll actually cover that part a little bit later. First things first. In this particular week's segment, we are covering the playoff games of, in April 4th, Rainbow 7 versus Estral, all the way till April 9th, finishing with Detonation Focus Me versus Fukuoka SoftBank Hawks Gaming within that period. A couple of thoughts right off the bat. I'm going to mention this really succinctly. There is something to be said about the approach to certain champions having a priority that shouldn't exist there. The most obvious one, just like at the top of the episode, why is there such a high priority to Viego in a bunch of regions? The only region that really calls it out is the PCS, where their casters are like, it's terrible. It's doing no damage. It's offering no frontline. It's offering no sense of proper crowd control or ability to dive or zoning tools. It is there to be a carry that cannot carry because its damage is also not sufficient enough. Cool. All right. What about else? Anything else? Well, let's think about it. Right? Why is Elise getting such a high priority? It is distinctly an early game champion that slowly falls off and becomes a neutral objective tool for the rest of the game if you do not get a heavy enough lead. And I think it's unfortunate because it's from the lack of capability that those two champions gain something. Because what's left? The meta champions are Wukong, Vi, Sejuani. Ooh, and then we get your alternatives. You get your Gragas's, your Jarvins, and everything else. But the fact that these champions and that the jungle role currently has such a unhealthy state at this moment is not great. And I'm hoping that at least in 13.6, when we visit that patch next week with Vietnam and Europe, when their league starts, we'll see something different from it. But that's let's hope. Because Riot has actually addressed that they will be changing their 13.8 patch and 13.7 to have a healthier jungle pool, because the rest of it seems pretty okay. The other thing that I'm wondering a lot of priority on is Lulu. I don't think Lulu is all that fantastic. There's an understanding. It allows disengage and some re-engage tools, as well as supplementing auto attacks regularly. But when you have a lack of engage opportunities and frontline from your team, you do not want to have a Lulu when a Nautilus is available, or a Thresh, a Leona, literally anything they could provide, just slightly more frontline, anything else, and a little bit more ability to start a team fight. Your Zeri will appreciate it way more than than an ult that saves somebody else, and then she's just screwed. Without further ado, let's actually look at some of the games and in a larger picture of what has been covered this week. And we head off to Latin America's LLA in the lower bracket semifinals. We got Movistar, Rainbow 7 versus Estral Esports. Estral came in as a powerhouse for the whole entirety of the playoffs in this region. But game after game after game after game, so on. I'm convinced they have no clue how to approach win conditions in general. They got by with strong laners, specifically at least in the top side and bot side, and some outplay potential on an individual level. But when it comes to vision, neutral setups, coordinated team fights, and closing out the game, Estral would only shine once a major mistake was punished sufficiently. Rainbow Seven, for their part, played with nice amount of flexibility and strong understanding of win conditions and teamfight coordinations. Their vision was stronger, sure, but not spectacular by any means. And I do worry about their priorities as a whole. They tend to double down on plays even if it is bad, and it makes it very easy to just punish the cocky attitude. But I'd be remiss to say that I'm not excited, because I am excited to see the rematch that they'll have against Six Karma for the LLA slot at MSI. Just that the way they won was not off of playing against an opponent that knew what they were doing. My MVP of the series is Miru, whose team fighting sense caused so much havoc for Estral, completely outplayed Takeover also every single game. Back to the LPL with the first series where we have our double elimination portion of the bracket. We've got over here JD Gaming JD Gaming versus Bilibili Gaming. Holy smokes, the LPL has got it good. Bilibili Gaming is by far my favorite team this season. The flexibility to play around any player, the gumption and awareness of their win conditions makes things exhilarating. That said, the series shows that they don't have what it takes for either vision denial, teamfight coordination, or at least consistent teamfight coordination, and consistent macro choices. Their early game and individual prowess do a heck of a lot, and it wouldn't surprise me to see them pull off the second slot through the lower bracket, but there's still that little bit that needs to be worked on. JD Gaming, on the other hand, baffle me slightly, where their vision and neutral setups are impeccable. The lack of consistent proactive moves and the individual lane differences had me confused as to why they were the first seed. But their macro choices, in-game adaptation, awareness of how to limit opponents' win conditions, and Ruler himself, my god, he's just so good, showed exactly why they were. The series is by far the closest while staying high quality. My MVP for the series goes to Ruler, whose individual outplay created strong presence throughout the series. And we're back to China's LPL's elimination bracket portion of the playoffs. We got ourselves Edward Gaming versus Oh My God or OMG. Stylistically, there is a very clear difference of approach. OMG, for their part, have very simple drafts, clear win conditions that scale for late game assurance, vis-a-vis Edward Gaming, who create complex drafts that require early game leads and strong executions at all stages of the game. I have no strong faith for either of these teams. While both employ different but equally strong vision control, their vision denial isn't consistent. Both have strong teamfight coordinations, but nearly all players show bizarre individual choices at any stage of the game. This series was close, but mostly from a lack of ability to balloon leads and close out games without either overcommitting or stepping out of bounds. Comparing these two teams to either JD Gaming or Bilibili Gaming, you'd be reminisced as to see who we should expect at MSI. But we'll see. Edward Gaming show to be a little bit more flexible overall, and series have a tendency to level teams up as they go along. My MVP for this series is Fofo, who quietly maximized influence and damage throughout the series. And we're back to Southeast Asia's PCS in the winners finals, or most likely just the semifinals here. We got Paris Saint-Germain Esports Talons, I will always call them the Talons, and CTBC Flying Oysters. Now, there's a lot to be concerned after watching this series. Like, nearly almost nothing happened. Flying Oysters, for their part, have a much stronger application of vision, drafting, and application of their win conditions, and yet their proactive moves fall short or disjointed, leading to moments that the Talons were able to use to garner control of the game regularly. The Talons, on the other hand, are fairly polished as a squad, but their polish is slow and reactive. If you're being controlled by your opponent for all of the tempo of the game, and that is an aspect of your win condition, then there's a larger issue here. The Talons are frustrating as there's clear win conditions and steps to get there, and they tend to opt out of those to drag it out to wait for a more guaranteed play, of which there are either so little or non-existent at some points of the game. I would excuse most of these things if either team played some form of proactive early game. Which, honestly, whichever of these two teams, because I honestly don't have faith in Frank Esports or Impunity Gaming, qualifies for MSI, will really struggle against the teams that show up there because of the slow nature of their play. My MVP for this series is Wako. I mean, like, honestly, 14k damage in one fight? Give this man his award. Come on. And we're back with Southeast Asia's PCS. We head off to the quarterfinals, or the losers finals. Frank Esports versus Impunity Esports. And some would look at how the top four have played and think maybe Frank Esports have improved their game. Now, I'm here to say that that's not very likely. Where Impunity understood not to draft over complicated compositions, knew what the win conditions were and how to get it, the very shallow visions, bizarre macro choices, coupled with the lack of coordination and bizarre macro choices, or even just the ability to deal with their counterparts during the laning phase, means that Frank Esports had a much simpler time in this series. Much easier, in fact. Frank, for their part, have only slightly more coordination and a little bit better play in terms of the vision department, but they don't really play to their win conditions when needed, and much of their strengths come from individual players outplaying their opponents and not necessarily from a coordinated front. The coming competition holds much stronger coordination, and given the results from last time, I don't think that Frank Esports will win the rematch against the Flying Oysters. I don't see that happening. My MVP for the series is Eminem, who kept being the star of each particular team fight, maximizing damage constantly, even if some of the positioning is a little bit suspect. It's the semifinals of Korea's LCK. We've got Gen.G versus KT Rolsters. Congratulations to Gen.G on being the fourth team to qualify for MSI. Honestly, KT showed to be the stronger early game team by quite a lot. Some good vision, solid laning, good macro, all in all, great stuff. But come mid to late game, and the approach becomes inconsistent, if not completely sloppy. Gen.G, for their part, know exactly how to apply their win conditions and close out games efficiently, especially while ahead. So, how do you think this looks like in the grand scheme of the series? Well, if you said Gen.G wins out more often than not because KT can't play to the win conditions and Gen.G defaults very well late game, then you'd be correct, because that's exactly what happened. You didn't have to guess, the results were right there, but KT had such promise that I kind of hope that they had fixed their funk for this point, and that, like, it could have been so close to something different. But honestly, at least with what we saw, I hope that they have the chance to fix it for summer, because I want to see what a non-fumble KT looks like. Because Game 1 we saw was super nice. Heck, Game 2 with all that control was really Game 3. Every game, except for the last one, looked good. Gen.G, having no strong approach early game, is still kind of worrying as they go off to face T1 again in the finals. And as it is, the result may just be the same as it was in the previous semifinals. My MVP for this series goes to Chovy, whose influence around the map was felt this series. Heck, he outroamed BDD's TF. How do you do that? We head off to Japan's LJL with their first semifinal, Sengoku Gaming versus FENNEL. Wow, it's like there was nothing that happens until everything explodes. At first, FENNEL was starting to impress me, properly punishing Sengoku Gaming for their lack of proactivity overall and having a solid sense around neutral objectives. But then the coordination from Sengoku Gaming clicked, and we had a machine that knew exactly what to do. Both teams played with some excellent vision, some of the best so far out of most of the teams here, and decent neutral approaches. But Sengoku Gaming are much stronger at drafting their compositions and playing to their win conditions. I do think that individually there is a lot of mistakes that could easily be rectified, but as a unit, FENNEL thrives once ahead, and Sengoku Gaming are consistent. My biggest issue, like mentioned a little bit earlier, is the lack of proactivity and proactive play in the first 18-ish minutes of the game from Sengoku Gaming. If anything, once the late game arrives, it's all about how to close, baby. But in the international scene, I could 100% see Sengoku Gaming struggling to even get their foot off the ground. Even if FENNEL lost, this is still the furthest any Oceanic player has gotten in the playoff internationally. My MVP for this series is Jet, who had his dancing shoes outplaying the entire squad of FENNEL. And we're back with China's quarterfinals in the LPL's double elimination bracket. We got Bilibili Gaming and oh my god, OMG. Oh, oof. Holy smokes, I was really sweating this series. Ugh. BLG gets it just as expected, right? Right, guys? Yeah. OMG put up a good fight. When they had the lead, they really knew how to approach it. And they also keep a fairly strong awareness of their win conditions and how to approach it. Similarly, BLG take those aspects, but with much stronger vision and neutral approach. But also similarly, both teams throw games incredibly hard. It's kind of concerning how easily both of these teams would struggle to end games for the other to find a mistake and punish quickly and efficiently. I mentioned how Bilibili looks good and a possible second contender, if not the contender for the LPL, but if they don't fix this really bizarre inability to close out the game, then the hype is just honestly not meant to be. My MVP for the series is Yagao, who manages to keep finding these flank angles at impossible times. Like, how does he get away with going through vision and just getting all these anti-ults, and just how does he steal tricks with flame? It's just, Yagao's a monster. And we're into the Southeast Asian PCS's semifinals. Frank Esports versus CTBC Flying Oysters, the rematch. Let's be realistic. This was the Flying Oysters series to lose for all 4 of these games. Every early game was in their control, and the Flying Oysters actively played towards their win condition, But then we'd have continuous, disjointed communication, split fights, isolated positional errors, drafting question marks, and I'm left here wondering how they even pull it off at the first time. Frank is by far the least proactive team, but by any means, they know how to minimize their errors and adapt in-game and in draft to avoid making the same mistakes twice. Frank is weaker in vision and in tempo and pace, but teamfight coordination, macro movements, neutral contesting, and honestly individual players themselves in the mid to late game just outshine the Flying Oysters in all of those senses. Frank Esports may get the spot for the PCS going into MSI if, the Talons don't know how to fix their closing problems, because Frank Esports may be a slow, extra safe team that has no idea how to really play towards their win conditions early up until it's punishing time, but they know how to close better. My MVP goes to Solo Kill, who enabled so many of those fights that turned those games around. Stop giving him Gnar. We're back with Brazil's CBLOL in the quarterfinals, lower bracket. Los Grandes versus Furia Esports. I'm pleasantly surprised by the performance out of Los Grandes. I was fully expecting Furia to just reverse sweep them in this situation, but the consistency was just not quite there. Furia still showed a solid sense of map pressure, team fighting, and where to punish their opponents. And that said, Los Grandes impressed me with their approach to neutrals, vision, and how to gain their win conditions. Hopefully Furia and Summer could come back with some polished up gameplay. I was kind of in awe by the coordination of it all. I'm, however, a little bit disappointed on how little the side lanes held impact, given how much that was drafted in every single game. But the vision game in this series made up for that. Do I think that Los Grandes has what it takes to make it all the way through? Not quite. The styles of the drafts combined with some individual errors makes it hard for me to consider this team as a favorite for the whole thing. But they have time to prove me wrong as they go off to face Pain Gaming and improve some of the flexibility that they need to have for that to work. My MVP for the series is Netuno, who quietly kept dishing damage untouched until it was just too late. And we're off to North America's LCS's semifinal into the lower bracket. We got ourselves Golden Guardians versus FlyQuest, and congratulations to Golden Guardians on being the 5th team to qualify for MSI. What a series. The back and forth was super interesting. I want to get the two most annoying things out of the gate. Firstly, FlyQuest, your vision game is inconsistent at best and inefficient at worst. Secondly, Guardians, your approach to neutrals is disjointed, and the priority you hold on them is baffling. That said, I like both of these teams. Each player shines with their approach to the game, and while Golden Guardians excelled at the early game and FlyQuest in the mid game, both sides showed a nice variety for their drafts, adaptation, and answers to each other's play. I would have hoped to see FlyQuest's full main lineup and may have made a difference in this situation, but I was also expecting Golden Guardians to get the second slot anyways. It's just a shame because there's a world in which I'm kind of convinced that FlyQuest could have made it, especially if it wasn't for that one fight in Game 4. I don't think that the Guardians will take the win against Cloud9 in the finals, but it should be entertaining nonetheless. I struggled with this one, but my MVP for the series goes to Gory, whose influence around team fights and early game pressure dictated much of how the series went. Man, I didn't expect to be so entertained. And off to the races, we're in Korea's LCK's grand final. Gen.G versus T1. It's not just a finals, it's a rematch, baby. And holy crap. Congrats to Gen.G on winning a big upset. The full total score between these two is even across the board with this playoffs. Honestly, a very fun series. Go ahead and watch it if you could. Let's address the elephant in the room, though. Yes, T1 held so much control in all 4 games in each of those early games and as we moved on from that point, Gen.G just defaulted to their draft and win conditions that were each simple, easy to execute, and properly address the weak points of T1. What's that, you may ask? Every player on T1 is a hero, and hero plays look super great when you're ahead or against a team that's much weaker when you gotta get back into the game. But here, Gen.G never let T1 the chance to come back, or not any real chances really, which is a far cry from the previous series these two teams had. Now, do I think this will continue into MSI? Who knows? It really depends if anyone watches the 2 series these teams have and understand how to address their massive weaknesses. This series was fun, but my concerns regarding the early game from Gen.G and their issues around neutrals and late game from T1 still lingers with their disjointed fights, and they're just still there. They're not as bad in this series, but still there. My MVP for this series, if there's any freaking question, which apparently there was, is Doran, who massively overperformed and spun circles around T1. You know, even his pace got it from the judges there. Doran, I think. Yeah. And we're back to Japan's LJL semi-final, the second one. We've got Detonation Focus Me versus Fukuoka SoftBank Hawks Gaming, or just the Hawks, I'm going to call them. This was less a series and more like watching someone play dodgeball. Just never playing with the ball ever. Starting with the Hawks, they have nice vision control and create simple drafts that work well with the kinds of games that we have. The problem comes with the fact that there is zero proactivity that came alongside of it. Detonation Focusing was given a participation trophy this series. Even as the Hawks punished some of the Dodgers' plays that Detonation Focus Me was throwing, the leads that were accumulated and the map pressure gained was just too much for them, and we wound up with Detonation in full control from just minute one, getting away with terrible plays over and over again. Now, that isn't to say that Detonation doesn't deserve the win. They do. They 100% do. They fully understand their win conditions, how to best use the tempo of the game. Slightly inconsistent with neutrals, but at least know when to use them for the game and not just depend on the timer. And the team fight coordination is superb. If Detonation wins the whole thing, it would be kind of expected from the LJL. I just hope that Sengoku Gaming punish their overzealous nature that comes from Detonation's play. My MVP for this series is Yudapon, not just from a point of view of damage, but because of his consistent play. It's been a long time since I've seen him at this point. It's really good. What a bunch of series, eh? Yeah. There's an underlying sense of frustration that I'm getting with many of these, and it's usually not this bad with every other split in previous years. Usually there's a sense of excitement, some like a little bit of frustration with some regions, but not like universally. I do not have, and I've repeated this, I've done this for a couple of videos now, where I said I don't have confidence in terms of like the quality of play that's going to go forward. Until recently. The finals for LCK has reinvigorated that at least I know that both Gen.G and T1 are of equal caliber, and the fact that they're both going to the next stage is good, so that regardless of the fact that they're C1, C2 is just kind of like in the air. I do think that on paper, T1 is technically better. They have a lot more flexibility under their for them, but Gen.G is a lot more consistent. But also in terms of the LPL, because I haven't seen which teams qualify, but out of the 3 teams left, the JDG, EDG, and BLG, if 2 of those 3 teams go forward, I'm not disappointed out of those 3 choices which team would be going on. The LPL has had some solid play. There's like a couple of like hiccups here or there, but it's been fantastic so far. And I'm saying and a lot, but like my thoughts are continuous on the situations, but the fact that Golden Guardians qualified is fantastic. I think that this LCS has got not a chance at winning, but a shot at actually demonstrating something cool to the international scene. The CBLOL also, in terms of the kinds of like the team that they might be bringing up, has been, again, I don't think they're going to win, but at least I think they're going to represent the region super well. And so, like, as things have gone forward, I've been a little bit more pleased with some of the quality of the game improving, and that they are properly showing some aspects of what's to come. And honestly, I am not disappointed. I like it. And I'm going to find out shortly, soon enough. Next week's video, we should have the entirety completed, so I'll see every single team, like what the whole roster will be. But at the moment, my hesitations for what was going to come has now uplifted a little bit. The games have gotten a lot snappier. Decisions aren't as sloppy necessarily. And overall, it is good sign to come that we're going to have a fairly decent tournament. I don't think this is going to be the best MSI, but who knows? Maybe the new format will reinvigorate some stuff. Which comes to the next thing, however, in terms of the elephant in the room is the LEC still. I mentioned that I wouldn't watch their winter playoffs, but I might have to. I'm not going to do it for the Road to MSI series. I will be watching them in terms of quick prep when it comes to evaluating G2, because I recorded this starting on the 15th to the 16th because I recorded over midnight at the end of the day, and on the 16th is when we're going to find out if G2 qualifies for the spring playoffs. And the fact that we have to be here, the fact that we are here in like G2 play, All right, context. I've mentioned previously that it is incredibly asinine and stupid as hell that the LEC is going to be sending off one of the representatives for having won having won winter split, as opposed to whoever wins spring split and whoever has the most points at the end and qualified for playoffs. That would have made more sense. It would have still acknowledged the winter split, right? Because the winter split is part of the format. I do think that the long form term of the LEC makes sense for Worlds because it acknowledges every part of the year and it's cool. Like for Worlds, I'm going to really appreciate this format. But for MSI, in terms of evaluating which team should go, recency is still the way to go. The winter split playoffs was played on patch 13.1b. The spring playoff is being played on 13.6. We are talking about such a huge, fundamentally different game to the point where if G2 doesn't qualify for the playoffs, you're going to end up with a team that qualified under the circumstances that does not even work with every other team that is going to go. And sure, they won't be the first seed for the LEC. And as such, they're not going to go to the second portion of MSI. They'll have to play in the first portion with a bunch of best of threes. Cool. But I can only imagine how fucking stupid and pissed the other three European teams that qualify for the playoffs and just do everything right, but miss out on one best of 5 and G2 not qualifying, totally fine. They don't have to play a single best of 5. So I'm hoping I don't have to actually watch any winter split playoff. But if they do not qualify, I will. I won't be covering them, but I will for purposes of setting up the what's the word again? It's the summary of the team to explain what is to be expected out of them and how they qualify. But I must say, Riot, please reevaluate next year if you're going to keep this format, because this format for Worlds, for MSI, you have a point system that exists. Make it so that if they qualify for spring playoff and they didn't win, they do it off of points, because then it acknowledges how well they did in winter, so it's not just a tiny slivet that's being evaluated. Because I agree, like, winter should be acknowledged, but it should not be acknowledged in this format. Those are my thoughts regarding this particular week. The games have been getting better. We are on the final stretch. There are just not a handful, but there are, I believe, only 14 more games or 15 more playoffs left to go through. The whole thing ends on the 23rd with a good over a week, about like 9 days before MSI itself. And I'm excited. But I want to hear what you have to think. What are your thoughts on some of the champion priorities? The excitement that some of the regions have been increasing the quality of their play over time and how that may look for MSI, and the whole shenaniganries that comes with Europe, because, and again, they have no non-European teams, so calling it not Europe is stupid. Anyways, thank you again for watching. I really appreciate everybody who does. And with that, I'll see you all again next week. Bye.